On May 29, 1453, a 15-year-old Byzantine princess stood at her palace window watching 80,000 Ottoman warriors pour through breaches in walls that had protected her city for over 1,000 years. Within hours, Sultan Mehmed II, barely 21 years old himself, would stand in her throne room with absolute power over her life, her future, and her very existence. What he decided to do with Princess Theodora in the 72 hours that followed would reveal something about conquest that contradicts everything we think we know about medieval warfare. This isn't a story about the brutality you expect. It's about something far more complex and far more unsettling. A decision that would reshape the relationship between conqueror and conquered for centuries to come. Because sometimes the most disturbing thing about power isn't how it destroys, but how it chooses not to, and the calculations behind that mercy can be more chilling than any act of violence. Constantinople in the spring of 1453 was the last flickering ember of an empire that had once ruled the known world. For 1100 years, the city had stood as the bridge between East and West, the jewel of Christendom, the inheritor of Rome's legacy. But now those legendary Theodosian walls, which had turned back countless invaders, faced something they had never encountered before. Ottoman cannons designed by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, including a monster 27 feet long that fired 1,200-pound stone balls capable of shattering fortifications that had seemed eternal. Inside those crumbling walls, 7,000 defenders faced impossible odds. Greeks, Italians, Spaniards, men who knew they were witnessing the end of their world but fought anyway because surrender meant watching everything they loved be torn apart by forces they could stop. The air was thick with gunpowder smoke and the smell of fear. Church bells rang constantly, their sound becoming a kind of funeral dirge for a civilization. Priests processed through streets carrying holy icons, praying for divine intervention that wasn't coming. Citizens barricaded their homes with furniture, knowing that Islamic law permitted 3 days of pillage after a city taken by force. 3 days where soldiers could claim whatever and whomever they wanted. In the great palace overlooking the Golden Horn, the remnants of the Palaiologos dynasty prepared for death. Emperor Constantine XI, 48 years old, unmarried, childless, knew with absolute certainty that he would die defending his city. He had already torn the imperial regalia from his armor, already decided that he would fall as a soldier rather than be captured as an emperor. But his extended family included cousins and nephews, and among them Princess Theodora Paleologina, a girl who had spent her entire 15 years behind palace walls, educated in Greek classics, trained in music and courtly arts, promised to a life of diplomatic marriage that would now never happen. Historical records describe her as slight in build, with the dark eyes characteristic of Byzantine nobility, fluent in Greek and Latin, accomplished in embroidery and music. She was a girl who should have been worried about which gown to wear to the next feast, not whether she would be enslaved or killed when the walls finally fell. What she wanted most was what all children of dying empires want, for tomorrow to be like yesterday, for the nightmare to stop. What she feared most was becoming one of thousands of captives distributed as war prizes, her body becoming property of whatever soldier claimed her first. On the Ottoman side of those crumbling walls, Sultan Mehmed II was consumed by an obsession that had defined his entire reign. Just 21 years old, he had already been sultan twice. First at 12 when his father abdicated, then overthrown by Janissary revolt, now restored at 19 with everything to prove. European courts mocked him as the boy sultan. His own generals doubted him. His father, Mehmed II, had been a legendary warrior whose shadow Mehmed could never escape. The young sultan was short, stocky, with an aquiline nose and intense dark eyes that observers described as burning with barely contained ambition. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He studied Alexander the Great obsessively, sleeping with a copy of Arrian's campaigns under his pillow, dreaming of conquests that would make him more than just another Ottoman ruler. Mehmed didn't want to merely conquer Constantinople. He wanted to become the new Caesar, the ruler who would merge East and West under his crown, the man who would prove that he was the legitimate heir to Rome itself. His advisors warned him that if the siege failed, his reign would end. His people groaned under the financial burden of feeding 80,000 soldiers for 57 days. Everything rested on breaching those walls. And as May drew to a close, Mehmed knew the final assault was coming. The night of May 28th brought a decision that shocked everyone. Sultan Mehmed made an unprecedented offer. Surrender now and everyone could leave safely with their possessions. Constantine could rule the Peloponnese as an Ottoman vassal. No blood would be spilled. It was an astonishing gesture from a ruler who had spent 2 months and a fortune preparing for assault. Emperor Constantine refused. According to the chronicler Francis, who witnessed the moment, the emperor said that surrendering the city was beyond his authority or anyone else's, that all of them had decided to die of their own free will rather than betray 1100 years of history. That night, Constantinople prepared for the end. Citizens gathered in the Hagia Sophia for a final divine liturgy. Orthodox and Catholic together, their theological disputes forgotten before death. Thousands packed the great church, candles flickering against gold mosaics depicting Christ's Pantocrator, voices raised in desperate prayer to a god who seemed to have abandoned them. In the palace, Princess Theodora's mother, a woman history remembers only as Lady Euphrosyne, made a decision that would save her daughter's life. She cut Theodora's hair short, stained her hands with kitchen soot, dressed her in coarse wool, and hid her among the servants. If the palace fell, noble women would be claimed as prizes immediately. Servants might be overlooked in the initial chaos, might have a chance to hide or escape. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. May 29, 1453. Began at 1 in the morning with Ottoman war drums beating a rhythm that sounded like the heartbeat of death itself. 80,000 voices roared in unison, a sound so overwhelming that chroniclers claimed the earth itself seemed to shake in response. The assault came in waves designed to exhaust the defenders. First the irregular troops, expendable soldiers who rushed the walls and died by the hundreds. Then Anatolian regulars, disciplined and determined, pressing harder. Finally, the elite janissaries, the Sultan's personal guard, striking like a spear point at the weakest sections of the wall. At 5 in the morning, disaster struck the defenders. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who had been leading the defense, took an arrow through his breastplate. Panicking despite months of courage, he demanded to be taken to his ships. His Italian soldiers saw their commander retreating and their formation broke. The Ottomans noticed the weakness immediately and pressure intensified. At the Kirka gate, a small postern usually kept locked. Someone had forgotten to close it after a sortie. An Ottoman soldier named Uli Batalk Hazen noticed the open door and rushed through with 30 men, raising the Ottoman banner on the inner wall. Byzantine defenders saw their nightmare made real. Enemy flags flying inside the walls, and morale shattered completely. Emperor Constantine, seeing the end, tore off his imperial regalia so he would die as a soldier rather than be captured as a prize, and charged into the melee shouting that the city had fallen and he was still alive. His body was never definitively identified. By 8 in the morning, Ottoman soldiers poured through 6 breach points and Islamic law activated. 3 days of pillage for an assaulting army. What followed would be remembered as one of the most brutal sacks of the medieval period, the most catastrophic day in Christian Europe since the fall of Rome itself. Soldiers ransacked every home, killed men in the streets, rounded up women and children for the slave markets. Historians estimate that between 30 and 50,000 people were enslaved that day, their lives ending in one moment and beginning again in a nightmare they couldn't escape. The Hagia Sophia became a trap. Those who sought sanctuary found none. Ottoman troops broke down the bronze doors, dragged out priests mid-prayer, and began selecting the most valuable captives. The great palace fell by mid-morning and Ottoman troops burst into marble corridors, hunting for the imperial family. Some nobles committed suicide rather than face capture. Others hid in cisterns and secret passages, knowing discovery meant death or slavery. Theodora, dressed as a kitchen servant, pressed herself into a storage room behind jars of olive oil, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain someone would hear it, listening to boots thundering past and screams echoing through corridors where she had once danced at festivals that now seemed impossibly distant. Hours passed while the initial frenzy subsided into systematic looting. Then Sultan Mehmed II entered Constantinople, and everything changed in ways nobody could have predicted.